Well, thank you, Lauren, and thank you so much, Plaza, for having me back. I'm so excited to demo with you guys today. Really looking forward to painting this charming little bird together. So I'm going to do a little bit of talking just about the basics of acrylics in case you've never used them before. But while I'm doing that, it's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes or so of talking. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of extra time to get your drawing on your panel. If you have not done so already, you can just sketch it on the panel or you can use transfer paper to get that image on there. All right, so my name is Vic and I've been with Royal Talons for almost 10 years, since 2016. So, I've used Amsterdam Acrylics for a long time, and I've actually used them before that too. I used to work at an art store when I was going through art school, and Amsterdam Acrylics were my supply of choice. So they have a very near and dear place in my heart. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that information with you guys and just talking about acrylics. So let me go over the basics of acrylics, and then I'll go ahead and switch over to my desk view and we'll get a closer look at the tubes. So essentially, if you've never used acrylics before, they're a very versatile medium. They dry waterproof, they dry flexible, and they're non-toxic depending on what pigments are inside them. They generally have no odor, and they're incredibly versatile because you can actually add different acrylic mediums into them to change their properties. So we're not going to go too far into the mediums or anything like that. But if you have not ever used acrylics before and you wish maybe that they dried slower or that they were a little bit thicker, just know that that's an option that you can always add those things in later. All right, so let me go ahead and switch over to my desk view and then we'll get a closer look at the tubes. Let me see here. Just kidding. Lauren, can you change the spotlight for me? I don't know why I can't do it. Thank you. You are a lifesaver.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Okay, perfect. So here we have these 15 milliliter tubes, these little fun size tubes. And there's actually quite a lot of information on them, even though they are so small. You have the different names here in a couple different languages in case you're bilingual. But you also have these little pluses, and this refers to the light fast rating. If there's 3 of them, it means somewhere between 50 to 100 years of light fast under museum conditions. That means that your color will not fade if preserved correctly. Next to that, we also have this little box. This box here refers to the opacity of the paint. So if it's completely filled in, like this one, that means it's fully opaque. And if it's completely transparent, like this little empty box here, then that means that it's completely transparent. It's gonna it's not gonna have as much coverage as something opaque. So anything in the middle, if it has a little black on the top, means it's semi-opaque, and if it has a line through it, it means semi-transparent. So you have a lot of info before you even start using the paint, how it's going to act and interact with other colors. Next to that, we have our color number. Amsterdam acrylics actually have a couple different lines that correlate with their color number, such as acrylic markers, spray paint, and acrylic ink. So if you're doing a larger project and you want some marker in it, it'll actually match up perfectly with this color as long as you use the same number. On the back of the tube, it shows you what pigments are inside. Some colors have multiple pigments, and then some will just have the one. So for example, this one is PR254. That stands for pigment red 254. And pigments are just kind of a helpful thing to know if you really like how a color works. You can always reference that pigment on the back and see what different types of colors have that same pigment. Amsterdam acrylics have been around since 1976, and there's over 102 colors. They also have a bunch of different size tubes but I love to start off with these small tubes because then you can see how those colors work and make sure that you love the colors before investing in larger tubes. And then as Lauren said, we have our 3 primaries today in the sample kit, the primary cyan, primary yellow, and the pyrrole red. So I swatched those out for us. And as you can see here, in the fullest strength, you have a little bit of volume. They're a medium viscosity paint, but you can add lots of water to make them more transparent and kind of give them almost a watercolor look. So we're going to be doing a lot of that today, watering them down, making them more transparent, and eliminating some of that volume. All right, so I'm going to hold off talking about the pearl colors, although I am so excited to talk to you guys about those. I'm going to just move this off to the side here, and I'm actually going to pull up my pocket wheel. So if you are new to color mixing, this is such a helpful tool. I always recommend this just because there's so much information on this, and I really wish that I would have had this when I was starting out. If you are new to mixing colors, this will help you exponentially. So I'm just going to give you a little brief tour of the pocket color wheel. But on the front here, it tells you the different types of colors, primary, secondary, tertiary, warm, and cool. And then it also gives you characteristics. For example, color, hue, value, tint, tone, shade. Essentially, it describes how you can change color. In addition, it also has this value scale at the bottom. This is so helpful for if you need to find a value of a certain gray, you can actually slip this over and kind of rotate it a little bit and see what the value may be. So for example, if I see a dark gray on the foot here and it's pretty close to a value 3, I know that it's going to be 70% black and 30% white. And it gives me a better idea of how much paint I need to mix in order to create that gray. And you'll also see this little handy front part kind of slides around. We have a couple different windows on the front here that show you what adding red, yellow, and blue will do to your colors. We're going to be doing a lot of complementary color mixing, in particular orange and blue. So if you want to see what orange plus blue would look like, you can slide your blue over, and you'll see that it makes this kind of beautiful, warm, almost Payne's gray looking color. So this is just going to be really helpful for planning out what color you need to mix and how you can achieve that. Not only that, but on the back of this color wheel, it has your color relationships. It describes each of the color relationships, but my favorite part is that it has this visual because it helps you really see how the colors work with each other. So, for example, if you've looked at the photo reference for the event, you'll see that it has a gray background. I decided that it would look a little bit nicer with a blue background because it's going to make our yellows and oranges pop up a little bit more. And the reason why I know it's going to work is because it's a split complementary color selection. So if you just move the top of your arrow to blue, which is going to be our prominent color, you'll see that yellow, orange, and red, orange work really well with that. So this is just a very helpful tool in general if you're planning out your paintings, to definitely use this and see what happens. And I'm going to be referencing this as we go throughout the painting, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of that before we started. All right. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about using a limited palette and color harmony. So using a limited palette is something I'm very passionate about because I believe that it teaches people how to mix colors, but also how to see colors. So the less colors you use, the more of an ability you'll have to see a color within your reference and know how to mix it. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But I painted this color wheel here using our 3 primary colors. And all of these colors are very strong. They don't look muddy at all. Everything looks very cohesive and has lots of harmony. I also painted a color wheel using colors directly out of the tube. And of course, there's more colors in this. This is from our 12 mixing set that we have. I just selected some that kind of fit the color wheel without blending. And of course, they're going to look more disjointed because they're not mixed. But what I want you to kind of look at is how these ones look like they belong together and how separate these ones look. So if you mix all of your colors, your painting is going to look more united. All right. So let's go ahead and get all set up to start painting. Do we have any questions before we do so? Are we doing good?
None in the chat so far.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to be mixing my colors on palette paper. And that's just so that you guys can see everything nice and large. You can use whatever works best for you. For these gesso boards, I typically like to tape them down. So if you have any masking tape or any type of tape, all you need to do is just make a little roll out of it and put it in the center. I love doing this because then it won't slip and slide around my desk. I find that if I don't tape it down, I'm holding it the entire time. So I don't want to do that. I just want to have it nice and secure on my desk here. Today I'm going to be painting with the Princeton Velvet Touch brushes. These are wonderful. They're a synthetic blend with a medium stiffness, and they're animal friendly. And they're great mixed media brushes. You can use them for oil, acrylic, watercolor, or gouache. So highly recommend these. We're basically going to be just using the 6 round for the bird and the wash brush for the background. So if you don't have a wash brush or a large flat, you can just use whatever you'd like for the background there. Okay. As far as putting paint out goes, I always like to just put out basically as much as I would put out toothpaste on my toothbrush. This kind of helps me make sure I don't have too much paint waste. Especially with these small tubes, I don't want to waste any paint here. So I'm just going to put a little bit out of each color. Oops. Let me just pick that up real quick. All right. Wonderful. And then I know we recommended a black and a white as well. You can use whatever black and white you have. I just wanted to let you guys know I'm using titanium white and oxide black. All right. So I'll be pulling over my reference as we go so that you guys can see what I'm doing, but I just don't want to take up too much desk space with that. All right. So for our background color, like I talked about, instead of doing the gray, we're going to go with blue. And instead of just painting the blue directly on our background here, I want you guys to see that there's a couple different layers. And our first layer is going to be a complementary color. So I'm going to refer to this kind of murky color that we're going to mix as mud. It's just a loving term, but essentially when you mix your complementary colors together, and a complementary color again is a color that's opposite to a color on the color wheel, you're going to get something called mud. And it's basically just because the colors are neutralizing each other. And it's going to give you a more full-bodied neutral color as opposed to just a standard gray. So we're going to be using this combination of mud a lot. And also a good trick for remembering complementary colors is there's always one primary color and one secondary color. And that's because, again, they're right across from each other on the color wheel. All right, so let's go ahead and start painting. I'm going to dip my big brush into my cup of water. And I'm going to start off by mixing orange. And essentially what we're going to be doing is mixing all three primary colors together. But because I want to make sure that all the colors are equal, I'm going to start off by mixing that orange because that yellow is not going to be as prominent as the red. So I'll mix the orange and then I'll slowly add blue into it to make my complementary neutral tone. It'll kind of be like a interesting warm brown with a little bit of a blue tinge to it. It's a very interesting color. And if you want yours to be cooler, you just add more blue to it. And if you want it to be warmer, then you add more orange into it. So this is kind of the color that we're going for. Let me hold this up. And the key here is to dip your brush back into the water after you load up your brush. And I'm just going to start doing really loose brush strokes to fill in the background. Maybe in some areas I'll scrub a little bit. And I don't even mind if it gets on top of the branch or the bird. I'm just going for something that looks really gestural and has a lot of energy and movement to it. Typically for my paintings, I like to paint very loose and gesturally for the background so that I capture extra movement within the painting. And just be sure to use extra water in some areas to really get some lighter areas. You can dip back into the blue if you want some areas to be a little cooler. But make sure you get most of the background colored. It's okay if there's a little bit of white showing through here and there. And we're going to let that dry up really well before we go back over it with our blue later. But we did a very transparent kind of loose wash, and as we go over later with our more opaque blue, we'll be able to choose which areas we want to cover and what areas we want to leave. One reason that I love painting on the gesso board is because it allows for all these different brush strokes. It really showcases the different thickness of the paint and how that paint sits on the board. It's a very finely sanded gesso that's on top of a hardboard, and I prefer that over the texture of a canvas just because you get to see those little extra beautiful brush stroke touches in there. All right, so I'm gonna switch on over to my small brush and dip that in the water. I always like to dip my brushes in the water before I dip them into the paint because then that way I know that it's not going to soak up the paint without knowing how much water is on the brush. So dipping it in the water first, and then I'm going to be dipping it into the yellow. And you'll see that during this painting session, I'm hardly ever just going to use a color straight out of the tube. I'm going to also dip a little bit of it into that mud kind of color. So just into the yellow and then grab a little bit of mud on there. And I'm going to begin blocking in any of the areas that are yellow on the bird here. So you don't have to worry too much if you overlap into the black, but I'm going to do short, choppy little brush strokes to fill in anywhere that may be yellow on the bird. And you'll notice that I paint really loose, really sloppy, and then as we get up in those higher layers, not only will I paint tighter, but I'll also paint thicker with the paint and use less water. So there's a lot of different ways that you can paint with acrylic. Again, another testament to how versatile it is. But, you know, with watercolor, you have to paint light to dark, typically. And then with oil, you normally paint dark to light. Acrylic, you can really do it anyway. And I like to basically do light to dark because I love watercolor and I find myself painting with watercolor the most. But you can really do whatever works best for you. So this is just one method to using it.
Hi, Vic. It's Jessica. I have a question.
Yeah.
I noticed that you're changing how you're holding the brush. Does that allow you to, get better control over it and like you go further back and loosen up?
That's a great question, Jessica. Yes. So the closer you hold your brush to the ferrule, the more control you're going to have. And the closer you hold it to the end of your brush, the less control you're going to have. So if I know I want my brush strokes to be nice and loose, I'll hold it pretty much in the middle or further back. And then that way it kind of forces me to not be so particular with how I place my brush strokes. That's an excellent question. All right. So I want you guys to notice how you have some really saturated bright areas and then a little bit of muddy in there. So it's good to have a mix. You don't want it to be completely smooth and solid painted in. And if you're unhappy at any point with an area that you've done, if that acrylic paint is still wet, you can wipe it using a paper towel, or you can take your brush and lightly scrub a little bit to get some of that paint back to the board. But as soon as that acrylic dries, you are stuck with that, unless if you want to paint over it. And that's one of the things I really like about acrylic is it's very forgiving in that sense. All right. So, okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. We're going to, again, be using some of our muddy color, but I'm going to just add a little bit of extra orange into it. So it's going to be that mud, but a little bit on the warmer side. So if you ran out of the mud, just mix orange and add a tiny bit of blue to it, but it'll be a predominantly orange heavy mix. And you'll see that we have this really beautiful warmish kind of brown from that. This is kind of like our underlayer almost. So I'm going to begin blocking in our branch down here. And you'll see I'm using longer brush strokes to kind of follow the contour of the branch, as opposed to those short choppy brush strokes that we did for the feathers. And don't worry at this point about matching the colors or the different values on the branch. We're going to do that later. We just want to get that brown on there. I think it's important to bring a painting up all together at the same time because colors interact with each other and change based off what colors they're next to. So instead of just really focusing on the bird and then really focusing on the branch and kind of just doing one element at the time, I like to kind of bring them all up at the same time so I can evaluate what needs to be done. And if you ran out of mud, you can just make more. I'm gonna be mixing mud all all class today. But you'll see everything's pretty light, transparent. We don't have too much volume at this point. Let me hold this up to show you my branch. Okay. So I'm gonna be using that same orangey mud mixture, and I'm gonna put a little bit more midtones into the body area. So you'll see I'm using a little bit of extra water. And the reason I'm adding extra water onto my brush is so that I can make sure that I'm controlling the transparency. I don't want it to be really thick at this point. And if you find it's too thick, just add extra water in there. We're going for a really light, slow buildup of the area. So I'm doing the muddy mix with a whole bunch of water, and then I'm just continuing to do those short little choppy brush strokes. And I'm placing these anywhere in my bird where I see midtones in my reference. So anywhere that looks like a darker kind of shadow, I'll be placing those short choppy marks. It's okay to have some that are a little thicker and some that are thinner. I think the variety is what makes it so charming. And I'm really not even paying too much attention to my reference photo at this point. I'm just kind of using it almost like inspiration. I just want to capture the feeling of the bird. I don't really need to capture every single feather exactly where it's placed. And I find that working quickly keeps me nice and loose and gestural with my brush strokes, because otherwise I can kind of fall down that rabbit hole of trying to make everything a little too precise. And as you put those little brush strokes on that panel, notice how smooth it feels and how you can kind of make that paint lay however you want to on there. It's just a really nice combination of a smooth surface and that paint just being the perfect thickness. And if you're not sure how many of these little brush strokes to do, I would say err on the side of more rather than less. We can always cover over them later if we need to with another layer of acrylic. But I think, especially for this little guy, it's nice to emphasize the amount of feathers he has. So you can already start to see him slowly taking shape here. Mm. Just giving everybody a little bit of breathing room. If I'm going too fast, please let me know.
I have another question about drying time. You mentioned that you wanted to let some of it dry beforehand. Is there a time frame? Is it, depending on how much water you're putting in it?
Another great question. Yes, so acrylics normally dry very quickly. In order to paint effectively in layers and make sure that you're not blending the layer underneath with the current layer you're putting on, you need to ensure that it's fully dry. So I live in Tucson, Arizona, and it is very dry here. So my paint may dry a little bit quicker than the East Coast, especially on a super rainy day. Um, so I always just like to give it a little bit of extra time to dry. If you use a ton of water, typically it'll evaporate pretty quick depending on the surface you're using. But if you're painting really thick on there, especially if you're painting with like a palette knife thick, you definitely need to give it some extra time. All right. So I'm gonna continue bringing that mud color up into the face. And the reason why I'm gonna do that, if you look at the reference photo, you'll see that the face is pretty dark. There's a little bit of highlight up above the forehead there on the rim, but there's not too much depth otherwise. It's a pretty flat face. You'll see on the painting that I did, I decided to add a little bit of extra brown in there. And not only is that tying together with the rest of my painting, but it's adding a little bit more interest to the bird's face. So we're going to paint a little bit of an underpainting on the bird's head there. It's just another way to make our painting more harmonious and to sneak some extra detail in there. So I'm going to take some of that brown, and again, short choppy brush strokes, especially near the features of the face, near the beak and the eye. We want to make sure that those strokes are maybe even a little tighter. And the reason why is because normally your viewer is going to look towards the face. It's kind of where our point of emphasis is going to be. So we want more detail in that area, but also typically birds just have smaller little feathers right around their features. So you don't have to paint the whole face, but anywhere where you want a little bit of brown to show through, just place that. And if you're not sure, just paint some feathers on there. I like to kind of follow the contour of the shape. So if I know the forehead is rounded, I'll follow upwards with those strokes as opposed to painting them all straight in the same direction. Just add a little bit of an angle to it. And you'll notice that some of the brush strokes have a really kind of jagged edge. That's a technique called dry brush. If you don't use a lot of water, you'll typically get those more ragged strokes. Whereas if you use more water, you'll get a smooth kind of washy effect from that. So how much water you have on your brush is a very important thing to be able to control as you kind of develop your own personal style. You can figure out what you like and what brush strokes work best for you. All right, so let's go ahead and switch out to our big brush now that we're gonna let our bird dry up just a little bit to make sure that's nice and ready to go for our next layer. So I'm gonna switch back up to my big brush here. And I'm going to paint the background next with this, but I don't want it to just be blue. I want to mix a little bit of white into it. And the reason why is because the blue is a transparent or semi-transparent color, but my white is opaque. So by combining these two, I'll have a semi-opaque if I did it 50-50, but if I use more white and less blue, then I'll have a pretty opaque color. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take just a tiniest bit of blue with a, a pretty big helping of white and just mix until I get a nice sky blue color. And if you want your blue to be much deeper, you can just use more blue. And if you're going for a more subtle look, use extra white. But because it's more opaque, we're going to be able to control what areas of the background we leave and what areas we want to cover up. So you can use it in its full strength and just start brushing on there, see how it looks. Try to be as gestural and loose as you were with the first layer. If you don't add any water, you're going to get all those dry brush, really soft effects. If you want it to be more subtle, you can dip your brush in the water. And then you'll have a much more transparent look. So by adding more water, you're always going to make it more transparent, but your brush is going to have smoother strokes. So I think it's nice to do a mix of them both. If you're worried about going over your bird, you can always start with your brush right on the edge and kind of flick outwards. And then that way you'll get a couple gestural strokes doing that. But yeah, I like to take my time and do smoother, more controlled strokes. So I'll hold it closer up to the bristles when I'm going around the bird. And then anywhere that's in the background, I'll hold my brush farther out and then be able to do those more gestural strokes. And it's okay if you overlap your bird a little bit here and there, or the branch, no worries. We can always paint over it, and we have a couple more layers to go. So that's really what I love about acrylic, is that it's no stress. I feel like you can't really make a mistake because you're always able to fix it. So it's a great medium to learn how to mix colors on, and also just to get a good foundation for painting with. And you're going to want to take a look at your painting all together. Make sure you have enough blue on there. If you have too much of the sky showing through and you want it to be of a more vivid blue, you just add another coat on there, or maybe have it be thicker in some areas. We are going to add a pearl on as our last coat. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but we'll have a little bit of a reflective kind of pearl as our last layer on there. So what we're going for right now is just making sure that our color is correct, that nice brilliant blue. And I love that now that we put that blue on, you can really see how yellow the belly is. It popped so much. And you'll notice if you use a lot of water on the gesso board that it might take a little bit longer for that to dry. It's just because it doesn't absorb quite as much as other methods do. Especially if you're used to painting with acrylic on something like watercolor paper, it'll absorb really quickly. And if you use really watered down acrylic methods like this on watercolor paper, you can even typically get a little bit of a watercolor effect from it. It's a really fun way to paint. I love painting like that. All right. So let's go ahead and switch back on over to our small brush here. We're going to start plugging in the black next. And as we plug in our black, I want you guys to take a look at your reference. We're not going to want to go completely black for everywhere. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of mud into our black and a little bit of water. But you can kind of use your color wheel and see all the different values that are up around the top of the head. We're also going to show some value through on those warmer areas of the face. So we have a lot of different ways of creating value and depth in this area of the face without painting it solid black. So what I'm going to do here is just rinse out my small brush. And I'm going to dip into the black, but instead of just having the black, I'm going to take a little bit of my mud color in with it too. If you spread it out on your palette and it's still looking dark, you're going to want to add enough mud to it that it looks warm. And depending on what black you're using at home, it may be a different black. The oxide black is pretty neutral. But I'm going for kind of a warm looking black. So you may want to add red and yellow to it and a tiny bit of blue, just to keep everything harmonious. And you'll notice that I'm basically not using anything straight out of the tube. I'm always mixing it with something. It's just going to give it more character, and each of my brush strokes are going to have a little bit more personality that way. So now I will pull up my reference, and I'm going to start with any of these areas that are next to the light brown we've placed on the face. So I'll just start to build up slowly the face. Don't worry about the darkest blacks yet. We'll do those next, but we're trying to get a good foundation of these little black feathers. The darkest black will add almost a pure black too, just for all that contrast. And as I place these, I'm just trying to keep the contour in mind, and I'm also leaving a little bit of a white ring around the eye. I don't want to get too close, just because I don't want to lose it. And every once in a while, I'll dip into my mixture that I've made. Maybe I'll add a little bit of extra black into it, or a little bit of extra mud. I like to really go for variety here. I don't want it to ever feel like it's all the same color. And the secret for getting really small strokes with a brush like this is, one, having a nice quality brush that comes to a point, but having enough water on the brush that it can make that pointed stroke. If you're getting frustrated and it's not coming to a small enough point for you, you may actually need a little bit more water on your brush. I'm taking a little bit of extra care around the beak and the eye. And I'm also taking a little bit of extra care along the top edge of the bird. Instead of painting a straight line along that forehead area, I'm gonna just add a little bit of a bump to it, just to kind of show feathers turning the edge.
Scott has a question. He wants to know, what's your favorite medium to use with Amsterdam?
Great question, Scott. Well, besides the glitter mediums that we have, which are so magical, I'm not sure if you've used those, Scott, but they're bottles of glitter that you just mix in with the paint and it makes it chunky and kind of mystical. I really enjoy our modeling paste. Makes it thick, nice and voluminous if you want to add lots of texture and volume to your painting. It's a really great way to do it. Blends beautifully with our paint, and it doesn't have an overwhelming like white cast to it that makes all your colors pastel that you mix into it. So I really enjoy using that. And especially if you're a mixed media artist, that's a really fun way to just add extra depth. In fact, it'd be really fun to do a bird with the modeling paste, just get some extra feathers in there. What's your favorite medium, Scott? We're waiting in suspense. Oh, heavy modeling paste. Okay, nice. Me too. Texture is great. It's wonderful when you can see the texture. It just yeah. adds a whole nother element to the viewing experience. All right, guys, so we're gonna carry the black down the bird's back and into this feather area. Again, I'm just using my reference kind of as inspiration. I'm not worrying about every feather in there. Just lightly brushing upwards away from the edge of the wing. So what I like to do is I'll start down low and then I'll flick my brush up. And then that way you get a really nice tapered line going upwards, and it's nice and smooth on the bottom and a little more jagged on the top. This is nice when you're doing the darker part of the wing because it really shows a nice individual shape on there. So anywhere that I see black in my reference, I'm just plopping a little quick line down, keeping it pretty loose still. Feel free to add extra water on your brush if it's looking rough.
Vic, I know you squeezed a tiny, tiny amount of paint to minimize drying. Do you have any tips for keeping the paint wet while you're using it on your palette, or keeping the palette wet?
That's a great question. Living in Tucson, I like to consider myself the resident expert on this because paint dries so quickly here. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can mix an acrylic medium inside. It's called retarder, and it will keep your paint wet longer. So if you're an oil painter and you're trying to get into acrylics, that may be your golden ticket. But there's different palettes you can use. There's something called, I believe, the Stay Wet palette, and it has like a sponge in it, and you can use that to keep your acrylics nice and wet as you work and also store them. But my personal favorite is just using a water mister. Every once in a while, I'll mist my paint if I'm working on something larger. The only thing you want to watch out for is if you're painting for a long time off one palette, is your paint may form something called a skin on it. And if it has that little skin, it's kind of like a plasticky skin looking substance, you can get that mixed up into your brush, and then eventually you'll have those skins on your painting. And most people don't want those on there. They're kind of a pain to get off, and so I like to use less amount of paint and then just put more out if I need to. And that way it helps you save your paint too. So less is more.
That's great. Thank you.
Of course. All right, so after you have your black kind of layer down, we still have a pretty light mixture of black in here. So when we use the black straight out of the tube, we're going to get a lot of contrast. So this is where it's really great to look at your photo reference. And anywhere where you see a really solid black, you don't have to fill in that area, but I would go back through using that same brush stroke and put some darker strokes right on top, and you'll get some additional depth. So I'm just going to do that, just a couple strokes on the face there. If it's looking too strokey to you, if there's way too many small feathers, you can use more of the side of your brush to make the feathers look a little bit larger and smooth it out. If you think that that visually your eye just needs a little bit of a place to rest, try using more the side of your brush, holding it more parallel to your desk or your easel. But I'm definitely gonna plug in some of this darker black on the face again, because the face is the focal point, so I want to add that extra contrast there. All right, it's starting to look like a bird. We're starting to get some beautiful contrast in here. It's starting to come together. So before we move on to painting the more neutral gray features, the beak and the feet, we're gonna go ahead and fill in our eye next. So the eye, I'm just gonna take my brush and I am gonna dip directly into the black and just as neatly as I can fill in that little circle. Don't worry about painting around the highlight or anything like that. We're gonna add a highlight and a little secondary color in there later. But we're just building this up really slowly in layers here. It's gonna look like a cartoon character for a while. If you have a lot of white remaining around your eye still, at this point, you can add some smaller little feathers to help break that up. Mhm. So now, since we're doing the neutral feet, just want to show you guys how wonderful this little tool can be for these values. We have our foot in the front here that's pretty much in the sun, and then this other foot that's in the shadow. And they're both neutral gray. They're just going to be gray and black, or black and white mixed together to make gray. But you can see this foot up front is a much lighter value. It's about a value 6. And this foot in the shade here is about a value 3. So this one is going to be 60% white, 40% black, and this one will be 30% white, 70% black. And you'll just be able to tell how to mix those this way. So on this little painting, it doesn't matter too much. You can play around with your black and white until you get the right gray. But if you're painting something really big and you need to mix a big batch of gray, it's nice to kind of have a plan of how much you need of both. And that way you can conserve paint and, just your time too. I'm really big into planning, so I jump at any opportunity I can to save paint and plan ahead. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna mix that gray. Okay. Going for something like this. If you wanted to add a little bit of mud into it, you can just to warm it up. But if you like that kind of juxtaposition of the cool features against the warm bird, you can leave them that more neutral tone. And instead of filling in that foot solid, what I like to do is almost just little horizontal lines. Think of him as Pippi Longstocking. We're just gonna do little stripes. And it's okay if they're sloppy. Just nice little stripes along the foot there. We're gonna do a couple layers of different stuff going on, so doesn't have to look any particular way on the first pass. I always like to think about acrylic as being the ugly duckling of art supplies because there's a middle stage where you look at your painting and you think, wow, what am I doing? But once you get to those final layers, then it kind of all comes together for you. Okay. This other foot over here, we're just gonna add that same gray in the lighter area of our photo reference, and then mix a little bit black into it for the darker areas. And you can go back through just looking at your photo reference. If you see any darker gray areas that you want to plug in while you have that on your brush, it's a really effective way of using the paint on your palette. If it's on your brush and you see it somewhere else on your painting, you can always plug it in at that point. All right. And while we have this gray out, I'm also going to do the beak of the bird. Going to use that gray we used for the feet. And I'm going to do a little blending technique. I'm basically going to place a line along the bottom of the beak with my light gray. Then I'll rinse out my brush and dip directly into the white. And then I'll just blend the edge of that with the white upwards. And that way I'll get a really nice smooth blend between that gray and the bottom of the beak there. And you can do that for the top half of the beak as well. So if you went a little bit over, it's no worries because you can always go back in with that black and cover it up again. It's a little bit of back and forth in that regard. I'm also going to take this light gray and add a little bit around the eye, just a tiny couple marks around the pupil there. And that's going to give us just a little bit more detail. I don't really want any of the white gesso board showing through by the time I'm done painting, so put some of that in. We just have a couple steps left on our bird, but these last steps are really what's going to bring it to life. And we're going to start off with the highlights. So I'm going to rinse out my brush really good. I want to make sure there's no paint left on it, because when I dip into my white, I want it to be pretty bright and pure. And dip right into that white. I'm going to leave it pretty thick on my brush. I don't want to add any water to it, because then that way I know it's going to be very opaque. And we'll start off with the highlight on the eye. All it's going to be is just one little dot on the pupil. Just like that. One tiny little dot there. If you need to add more of a highlight to your beak, you can. You can add highlights to the feet.
Vic, Scott has a question. He's curious, what's your mindset as you choose colors for your palette?
That's a great question. It really depends on the mood that I'm trying to set. Like for example, I just did a painting that was predominantly cool colors, and I used like a dark blue, a dark violet, a turquoise, and my only warm color was like a beige and a gold. So that palette I created just to set kind of like a nighttime mood. as far as choosing limited palettes to create art, like if I'm doing a portrait, I'll probably use more earthy colors than primary colors, just because accomplishing those skin tones will be a little bit easier. It'll include less mixing. Um, but generally, if I don't know what I want with my palette, I'll start off with primary colors plus like a Quin rose. I love quinacridone colors. I'll always have a titanium white in my palette, no matter what, because I love the contrast that that white brings. Um, so it really depends. And I think every artist kind of is partial to some colors rather than others, but as you grow into what your style is and what colors you like, you'll know what colors you need to include to make it your own.
Great.
All right, guys. So I'm gonna add some little white highlights on the wing here. Anywhere on my photo reference that has a white feather, I'm just gonna thickly place a white stroke right over top, slightly overlapping my black a little bit. If you feel like your body of your bird needs any white over top of the feathers, if it's looking too dark, maybe you put too many midtones in there, you can actually mix a little yellow with the white and cover over some of that. The white's just so helpful in terms of being able to reshape how your colors look. All right, guys, and I know we're going quick, but I just want to make sure we can get to everything. We just have really two more steps and then we're going to do our pearl colors. And the pearl colors are a lot of fun, so I want to make sure we have enough time for those. So the next step is going to be to add a little bit of red on the chest here. You can choose how red you want this to be. I'm going to say that this is more of like a red-orange kind of color. In fact, it has a little bit of a brown to it as well. So in order to mix this color, maybe you add a little bit of black to shade it darker if you want to. Or if you like a more brilliant kind of mix, add a little bit more red. So I'm going to go for a pretty heavy red-orange mix. And I'll predominantly just do the very center of the chest and then just do a couple little strokes outwards, just to make sure it doesn't look too disconnected. But I think our jobs as artists is to look at the photo reference and make it our own. So don't worry if it doesn't look like the reference, or if you want it to be brighter, make it brighter. If you want to blend it out, you can dip back into the yellow, add a little more yellow, and kind of target that transitional area between the two colors. Or you can add more water to make it transparent and blend it that way. So anywhere that you see that warmer kind of color, you can just plug that in. if you wanted to add a little bit of that orangey color to your branch, you can. If it's too orange, just add a tiny bit of blue into it. And that's what I love about doing these limited palettes is you only really are working with 3 colors. So if you know your orange is too orange and you need to neutralize it a little, you're just gonna know to add blue. But if you have 12 colors on your palette and you're not sure how they interact with each other, you're gonna have a lot harder time looking at your reference and deciding what it needs. But if you're just working with your primaries and you know you just want it to be darker, you're going to shade that color by adding a little bit of black into it. So it's just a very effective way to learn how color mixes, and these Amsterdam acrylics are so wonderful for that because they don't have a ton of binder in them, they just have a lot of pigment. And also, they are technically an artist grade paint, but they really do perform like a professional grade paint, but just at a student grade price. So I've always really loved these for that reason. They're just so user friendly, full of pigment. One thing that I do like to talk about with acrylics is something called color shift. So some acrylics, actually most, will dry darker than they look when they're wet. And that's because the binder contains water, and if you put water into that binder, it will shift and be more white in color. So as it dries, it'll get darker, and it's just something to look out for as you paint.
Vic, earlier you showed us that you had made a color wheel. Do you often do any sort of swatch outs before a painting to get an idea of your mixes, or do you just go as you
I
see it?
sure do. I sure do. I'm a big planner. I have sketchbooks full of color wheels. For every project I'm gonna do, I map out my colors and decide what colors I think will work best. I see how limited I can make my palette. I try to pair out colors as much as I can because the more simple it is, the more color harmony it will have, and I think the more effective of a painting it'll be. So that's a great question. I love to plan ahead. So if you have a little handy color wheel like the pocket one, it's a very useful tool for helping to plan. Okay, guys. So before we move on to the pearl colors, I do want to briefly touch on one thing. I think this is so important, and I was never taught this. I had to learn it myself. So I always like to just say this. I know a lot of people know about it already, but it's so important to evaluate your art so that you know what you need to fix and how you can figure out what you want to change. Because sometimes we've been looking at a piece of art so close we don't know what we need to change, we just know something is wrong. So my favorite way to figure out what I need to do is to change my perspective. So what I like to do is flip whatever I'm working on upside down. And then from there, I'll be able to easily spot what I don't like. Like, for example, I didn't notice when it was up the other way, but now I see that I'm not super happy with how this area transitions from yellow into the orange. You know, maybe I want some brighter yellow in the tail. This is just a great way to change your perspective and be able to identify what you need to change. So if you're ever working on something and you get stuck, I recommend doing this or taking a picture of it with your phone. I know we've all been there where we've been working on something and we take a picture with our phone and we're like, oh my gosh, this looks beautiful. And then you look at it on your phone and you're like, wait, that's not what it looks like. So it's just a way of changing your perspective. So I invite you to do so. If you want to change your perspective really quick, look and see if there are any things you'd like to fix. Let's do that. And I'm just gonna add a little more yellow to that area. And then we're gonna move on to our pearlescent colors, which I'm very excited about. I'm so thrilled that we included those in the sample set because I think it's a great way to kind of embellish art that you may already have. And they're such a fun acrylic. And actually I have a question for Scott about them. So, or yeah, get ready, Scott. All right. So as you guys put your final strokes on your main painting of your bird, I'm going to talk a little bit about these pearl colors. We've received 3 of them, the 3 primaries, which is really great because we can mix our secondary colors based off that. Red, yellow, and blue. And I did this little swatch to show you how these pearl colors work, because if you've never used these before, you'll notice that they show up a lot differently on a light surface than they do on a dark. So you'll see they almost have like I like to call it like a fairy effect. It's a very, very subtle pearl look. You'll also see where these are very built up and at different angles. They take on this kind of white hue that almost looks like a mother of pearl. So just be aware that the thicker you pile them up, they don't go up in hue or chroma, they just go more white. So they're very interesting to use, and they really do give just a beautiful little extra something. You can see I used the red on the chest here, the yellow on the wings, and then the blue on the background. So they just add that other layer of visual interest to your paintings, so they're a lot of fun to use. The one thing that's kind of tricky about these is they are a bit hard to see on your palette what color they are. You hold them up to the light, you'll be able to see that they reflect whatever color they are. So I'll show you in a second here. But if you have any gray palette paper, this is a great um, supply to use with that gray paper. So you'll see it barely reflects red, yellow, and blue. And I talked to Jeff Olson, who's our education director for Royal Talons, about these paints because I wanted to know more about the coated mica pigment that's on the back of them. So Jeff told me that the coated mica pigments are what makes them pearl, as opposed to oxidized mica, which makes them metallic. I was just wondering, Scott, if you had any more info on that. I know it's a very specific question, but is it all the same mica that's just coated with the pigment of the color, or how do they make the pearl color separate?
Well, you have 2 different sort of techniques in order to achieve different looks. So either you can coat either do the mica in a particular coating, which then causes light to refract in a different way, and that's how our eye will interpret different colors just by the method of changing the refraction angle of the mica. So when you change the angle of the mica, the way that it reflects light, then that's how our eye interprets a different color or a different aspect. So otherwise, the other aspect to that is when you do oxidation. That is how we can achieve different sorts of metallic looks. So they have these are really 2 different processes, and each layer of the mica actually is about 15 layers deep. So depending upon the level of oxidation or coating, determines kind of the color that we see.
Gosh, fascinating. I love how art supplies kind of overlaps with science a little bit sometimes. It's
Mm-hmm.
very interesting. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that. I could have no shape, way, or form explained that half as eloquently as you did, so I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, so let's add some pearl to our bird paintings now that we know the science behind it. And let's start off with the blue first, because it's going to be in the background and you're going to be able to see how that interacts. Now, keep in mind, it's going to show up a little bit more subtle on our light background. So wherever your blue is the darkest is where it's going to pick up the most. So I'm just going to rinse out my big brush. I'm going to get a good amount of paint on there. If you want that more subtle look, add some extra water into it. And I'm just gonna do some layers of dry brush on there. Just nice and loose. And yeah, you're gonna want to wait for this to dry before you judge the pearl, because although it's beautiful when it's wet, it's even more beautiful when it's dry. If you want to, you can actually fold some of the standard acrylics in with this paint too. You can get some beautiful effects that way as well. So if you want more blue on your background, that would be a really great way to test out how these two paints combine as well. And you don't have to put it everywhere, you know, wherever you just want that extra additional layer on there. Gosh, I love using these pearl colors. They're so fun. They're so subtly beautiful. All right, and now I'm gonna switch over to my small brush and I'm gonna dip into the yellow. And I want to keep the yellow pretty thick on my brush as well. And I'm going to target any area where that yellow and that black touch each other, because that's where that yellow is really going to stand out, is over that darker surface. So anywhere that's kind of in between the wing, right in that area, I'm gonna get some beautiful effects. And I'm just gonna place it in a couple areas of the yellow. You don't have to paint over the whole thing unless you want to. But one thing to keep in mind when using paints that contain mica is you may want a different rinse cup depending on your painting. If you only want that mica in one area, it's really easy to get in your water and kind of contaminate other paints on your palette. So what I like to do is if I'm just using the mica in one area, I'll just save it for last, or I'll have a separate rinse cup and a separate brush for it, just to make sure that I'm keeping them nice and separate. It's not too hard to keep separate with acrylics, but if it's something like watercolor, it can get away from you pretty quick. Okay. Another area that I like to put this yellow is right in the eye. I'm gonna do just the tiniest little half circle in there, just to add a little reflective color. Just gives him a lot of extra little personality right in the eye there. Brush up into the face. And last but not least, I'm going to use the red kind of on the red area of the chest. And what's so great about these is you can mix, your orange, green, or purple from these pearl colors. Like Lauren said, we also have the set of pearl colors, which contains each of those, but it also contains a white pearl. And I love the white pearl color because you can tone it to any pearl you want it to be. So it's really a versatile option.
And while Vic is finishing up with the pearl colors, I do have an color chart for the Amsterdam Acrylics. I'm sharing it in the chat now with everyone here. It's a PDF you can download. Just would be really helpful if you're interested in exploring this range further. You can see all the colors that we do offer in this acrylic range.
Awesome. Yeah, we have 102 colors, right? So we have a lot to choose from. And I know we painted very fast and ferociously over the last hour and a half. So thank you guys for hanging in there with me and painting along. I had a really great time. If anybody has any questions, please let us know.
Yeah, while everyone is finishing up, we do, as always, like to see what everyone's worked on. So I'd like to invite everyone, if they are at a good stopping point, they want to share, turn on their camera and share with everyone in the class today what they've painted. So, oh, there we go. I'm going to change the gallery view so I can see.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Beautiful
coming
work.
in.
Oh,
Very cool.
these are so beautiful. Amazing work, guys.
These are fantastic.
I love how everybody's is so individual. What'd you guys think about those pearl colors? Pretty cool, right? Yes. Wonderful.
Hey Vic, can you talk about some of the other uses of the pearl colors that you happen to use them for?
Absolutely. I love using the pearl colors on our black Van Gogh watercolor paper. Um, you can do an entire painting on that black paper just using those colors. It's pretty amazing how it just radiates off those darker surfaces. But if you're painting something like, let's say, a fish, and you do an underpainting in black on a white canvas, wherever you put those pearl colors over top will pick up that dark kind of pearl look, and it's really magical. I know that when people look at the pearl colors or metallic colors in general, they think, what am I going to use that for? But you can fold them into your standard acrylics and make them more subtle, or you can do a whole painting with them on black paper. So um, lots of different options.
Yeah, just to clarify, we did just have a question or a concern about the color version of the reference art. I'm assuming you're talking about Hickey. We didn't provide a printout of that, but we do have it in a link. I can share that in the chat, and it'll also be in the follow-up email tomorrow if you would like to reference that later. We only provided the line art, but we do have a PDF with the reference image we can share with you.
Yeah. I might be able to put it in the chat too, if that would be
Great.
helpful, Lauren.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
let
you.
me do that.
And yeah, if no one has any other questions, this was really great. We'll just get that reference art in there. Loved seeing the pearl colors. I've never seen those before. So those were really great to see in use. And looking forward to playing with those some more. And there's the reference. And again, we will do a follow-up email. It'll have all the links. If you guys have any questions, please feel free. You can reach out to events at Plaza Art. You're welcome. Hope you all had a great time. Thank you, Vic, and thank you, Scott, for all your knowledge. And this was great. And Vic, you said you're from the Silver Spring area, which we are hosting this from in Maryland. So it's great. So
Yep.
glad you could return to your local roots there.
Me too. Me too. Thank you guys again so much for having me. I had a wonderful time. So thank you for painting with me. And yeah, hopefully I'll see you soon.
Great. Yep.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
guys.
Excellent.
Thank
See you
you.
guys
Nice
on the
job.
next one.
Bye, guys.